My name is Sarah Calloway. I'm 32 years old. And on October 18th, 2025, my parents didn't just miss my wedding. They walked out in the middle of it. 200 guests. 4 p.m. ceremony. The Grand Magnolia Estate in Franklin, Tennessee. My father stood up, looked me in the eyes, and left. All because I refused to move my wedding date for my sister's vacation. What they didn't know was what my husband had been quietly building for 3 weeks. And at 8:23 that night, he made sure every single person in that room knew the truth. Three kinds of people are watching this. 90% watch and forget. 7% like, but never return. Only 3% do both. And those are the ones who go furthest. 3 seconds to decide which one you are. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I read every single one, but before I tell you what happened that night, let me take you back to where this story really began. My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 32 years old. And on October 18th, 2025, my parents didn't just miss my wedding, they walked out in the middle of it. 200 invitations had gone out. 165 people actually showed up. The Grand Magnolia Estate in Franklin, Tennessee, was strung with warm lights that caught the last of the October sun, and the old oak trees along the pavilion path smelled like wood smoke and something sweeter I couldn't quite name. It was everything I had spent 18 months planning. And somewhere in the middle of it, while Pastor James was still speaking, my father stood up, looked at me standing at that altar, and walked away. My mother followed, her heels clicking against the stone path, her shoulders shaking with the kind of sobs that are meant to be noticed. The silence they left behind lasted 45 seconds. I counted. At the reception that evening, the seating coordinator had placed 2 chairs at the front table nearest the dance floor. White folded cards marked the spots in careful calligraphy. Richard Hargrove. Beverly Hargrove. The chairs sat empty all night. The candles in the centerpiece burned down around them. People tried not to look. They looked anyway. I want to tell you I was numb. That would be cleaner, easier to explain. But the truth is, I felt everything, all at once. The way you feel a burn a full second after you touch the stove. The shock first. Then the heat. The morning of my wedding. Before the hair appointment. Before Megan zipped up my dress. Before any of it, I had opened the small wooden box I kept on my nightstand. Inside was a letter. My grandmother had written it by hand sometime in the last year of her life. The ink slightly faded now. The paper soft at the folds from how many times I had opened and closed it. She wrote, "Sarah, my darling, when this day comes, know that I chose you. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real." I had read those words so many times I could close my eyes and see her handwriting without looking. Looping G's. A small cross on every lowercase t. She passed in 2019. She never got to see me in that dress. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my bridal bag that morning, not because I planned to read it again, but because I needed it close. The way you carry something that steadies you when the ground shifts. And the ground shifted. More than once. Before the ceremony, before the dancing, before the tiramisu, and the open bar, and the DJ who very bravely kept the evening moving, there was a moment at 8:23 that night when my husband Daniel stood up from our table, took the microphone, and told every single person in that room something my parents had worked very hard to keep buried. One thing, 22 slides. 4 months of quiet, careful work that Daniel had done without me asking, without me knowing, because that is the kind of man he is. What happened in that ballroom changed everything. Their reputation, their business, and the last remaining thread of control they thought they still had over my life. But to understand why Daniel did what he did that night, you need to understand how we got there. You need to understand my family, and you need to understand that what looked like a story about a wedding date was never really about a wedding date at all. It was about who gets chosen and who gets left behind, and what happens when someone finally decides that is enough. It started, like most good stories do, with hope. December 14th, 2023. Daniel had asked me to meet him at Centennial Park after work, which was not unusual. We walked that park on weekend mornings, fed the ducks near the lake, sat on the hill by the Parthenon replica when the weather was good. It was our place in the way that certain places become yours without you deciding it. So when I showed up that evening and found him standing under the big elm near the water, hands in his coat pockets, I thought nothing of it. Then I saw the blanket, the thermos of hot cider, the string of battery lights he had looped through the low branches above him, glowing warm gold in the early dark. He got down on one knee before I could say a word. The ring had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light in a way that made it look larger than it was. Daniel's mother had passed when he was 19, and his grandmother had raised him through the years after. When she passed 2 years ago, the ring came to him. He told me later he had known from the moment he held it that it was meant for this. For me. For this exact moment under these exact lights in the cold December air. I said yes before he finished asking. The next morning I called my parents. My father Richard answered first, his voice warm in a way it wasn't always. "Sarah," he said, "we are so happy for you. We will help however we can." My mother Beverly cried. Happy tears, I believed then. I held the phone against my ear and let myself feel it fully, the rare and particular warmth of being celebrated by the people who raised you. I should have recorded that call. I didn't know yet that I would need proof of their kindness. 3 weeks later, over Sunday lunch at their house in Brentwood, my mother set down her sweet tea and looked at me with a smile I recognized from childhood, the smile that meant she had something to give. "Sarah, honey," she said, "your grandparents left something for this. For your wedding." I didn't understand at first. Then she said, "The trust fund." When my father's parents had passed in 2019, they had set aside $120,000 specifically for their first grandchild's wedding. Not as a gift to my parents, not as a general inheritance, as a trust, with language my grandfather had apparently been very deliberate about, with my name attached to it. My throat tightened in a way I couldn't explain. They had been gone almost 5 years by then. But sitting at that table in Brentwood, I felt them. Felt the weight of their planning, their love reaching forward through time to hand me something they would never get to see me use. "Your father and I will make sure you have the wedding you deserve," my mother added. I believed her. By late March of 2024, Daniel and I had toured 11 venues across the Nashville area. Too small, too expensive, too corporate, too far. Then we drove out to Franklin and walked the grounds of the Grand Magnolia Estate. String lights along the pavilion path. Old oak trees wide enough to wrap your arms around. A view of the Tennessee hills that turned gold in the afternoon. I stepped onto the overlooked terrace and felt something settle in my chest. Carol Bennett, the venue coordinator, was a calm woman with a leather planner and the kind of steady efficiency that made you trust her immediately. "We can do October 18th, 2025, she said. "That gives you 18 months. Fall dates go fast out here. You're smart to book early." Daniel signed the contract on March 28th. The deposit was $8,500, non-refundable. We split it from our savings without hesitation. That night, I texted my mother a photo of the terrace. Her reply came within minutes. "Sweetheart," she wrote, "it's absolutely beautiful. October 18th is perfect. We cannot wait to celebrate you." I saved that text. I'm still not entirely sure why. Maybe some part of me already knew. In the quiet way you sometimes know things before you're ready to admit them, that I would need it later. I floated through the next weeks thinking, for once, I am the priority. For once, they see me. I should have known better. To understand what happened next, you need to understand my sister Amber. Amber Hargrove is 27 years old. She has 142,000 Instagram followers, a ring light she keeps permanently set up in the corner of her apartment, and a talent for making ordinary moments look like magazine spreads. Sunsets in Sedona, acai bowls in Santa Monica, rooftop dinners in cities she passes through for 4 days, and photographs as though she lives there. Her feed is beautiful in the way that certain beautiful things make you feel quietly inadequate, like you are living your life wrong without knowing it. She has never held a salaried job. My parents pay her rent. They cover her car. They fund the trips, the retreats, the workshops with brand consultants who charge more per hour than I make in a day. They call it investing in her future. They say she has something, a spark, a presence, that kind of intangible quality that is either going to become something big or quietly disappear, and they are not willing to risk being wrong. I am a third-grade teacher at Crestwood Elementary in Nashville. I have been there for 6 years. I love it in the particular exhausting way you love something that asks everything from you and gives it all back differently. My parents have never once attended a school event, a fundraiser, a curriculum night. When I received a commendation from the district 2 years ago, my mother sent a text. "That's wonderful, honey. My father didn't mention it." Growing up, Amber got ballet lessons, piano lessons, a summer art program in Asheville. I got, "Melissa, you're so responsible. You don't need as much help." The version of that sentence I heard so many times, it stopped sounding like a compliment and started sounding like a door closing. I learned early what I was in this family. I was not the golden child. I was the reliable one, the one who would be fine. Thanksgiving 2019. My grandparents had passed earlier that year, within 4 months of each other, the way long married people sometimes do. The house felt different without them. We were sitting around the table at my parents' place in Brentwood, the good china out, the candles lit. Amber talking about her plans to build a real brand, to turn her following into a business, to become the kind of name that companies came to rather than chased. My father looked at her with a particular light in his eyes, the kind of light that is unmistakably pride. "She's going to do something big," he said. "She has that spark." Then he looked at me. I was sitting across the table with a glass of wine, having just finished telling them about the mentorship program I was developing at school, a before and after initiative for kids who came in reading below grade level. I had been talking for 3 minutes. My father had nodded twice. He looked at me and said, "Sarah, you're steady. Steady is good. You'll be fine. Fine." I have turned that word over in my hands many times since then, examined it from every angle, tried to find the version of it that felt like love. Sometimes I almost could. Most times I couldn't. But by the time Daniel proposed at Centennial Park, I had made a kind of peace with it. I had my classroom. I had my apartment. I had Daniel, who looked at me the way my father looked at Amber, with that particular unguarded light, and who had never once in 4 years made me feel like a secondary option. I had decided I didn't need my parents to see me clearly. I had enough people who did. That was true, right up until the moment it wasn't. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had Daniel. I had a life I had built with my own hands, brick by careful brick. Or so I thought. The Instagram story should have been my warning. It was a Tuesday in late June, 2025. I was sitting in my classroom after the final bell, grading reading assessments, when my phone lit up with Amber's latest story. A video of her jumping on her bed, arms wide, shrieking with the particular joy of someone who has just received very good news. The caption read, Something incredible just landed in my lap. Sedona, here I come. Some things are just meant to be. I watched it once, set my phone face down on the desk, and went back to my papers. Amber was always going somewhere. That was not news. The news came 3 weeks later, July 12th, 2025. I was in the middle of a professional development session at school when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Beverly. I stepped into the hallway, pressed the phone to my ear, and said hello in the bright, distracted voice of someone who expects a routine call. Her voice was not routine. It was the careful, measured tone she used when she had rehearsed what she was about to say. "Sarah," she started, "it's about your wedding date." I felt something tighten in my chest before she said another word. A kind of instinct, the body knowing before the mind catches up. "Amber has booked a retreat," she said. "A wellness and brand development intensive in Sedona. It's a tremendous opportunity for her, networking with major labels, creating content with other influencers. It's completely non-refundable. The dates are October 10th through the 24th. I stood in the school hallway and looked at the bulletin board across from me. Student artwork, crayon suns and lopsided houses and names written in careful block letters. I stared at a drawing of a yellow dog for a long moment. "Mom," I said slowly, "that's my wedding." "I know, sweetheart. That's why I'm calling. We were thinking, maybe you could move it. November is lovely. Or even spring of next year." Daniel would understand. I had sent save the dates to 200 people in May. The florist contract was signed. My dress was being altered at a bridal shop on Charlotte Avenue. The venue deposit was non-refundable. 18 months of planning, and she was asking me to set it aside for a brand development retreat. I told her no, calmly, clearly. No. She hung up before I could say anything else. 2 days later, my father called. His voice had none of the warmth from that December phone call after the engagement. This was the other voice, the one he used in negotiations. Flat and certain and already decided. "Sarah," he said, "this is about family. Amber's career is at a critical moment. This retreat is exactly the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. Your wedding can happen anytime. What you're doing right now is selfish." That word landed like something physical. I kept my voice level. I told him about the contract, about the 200 people who had rearranged their calendars, about the dress, about the deposit. He interrupted me twice. "Money isn't the point," he said. "Respect is." "We are not changing the date," I told him. He exhaled, sharp and short. "Then we have a problem." He hung up. I drove home with my hands tight on the wheel and my jaw tighter. Daniel was in the kitchen when I walked in. He saw my face and crossed the room without a word, pulling me into him the way he always did, one hand on the back of my head, steady and certain. "What did he say?" Daniel asked quietly into my hair. "He called me selfish." Daniel held me tighter. "There's a difference between selfish and standing up for yourself," he said. "Don't let him take that from you." I wanted to believe him completely. I almost did. That night, I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling. And somewhere across the city, without telling me, Daniel opened his laptop and started looking. July 22nd. Richard and Beverly requested a family meeting. I knew walking in it was a trap. Daniel drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the neighborhoods get wider and quieter as we moved toward Brentwood, the lawns more manicured, the driveways longer. My parents' house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, brick and white trim, 4 bedrooms, the kind of home that communicated success from the street without trying too hard. I had grown up in that house. I knew every room, every creak in the hallway floor, every way the light fell in the kitchen at different hours of the day. I had never dreaded walking into it the way I did that morning. Daniel squeezed my hand on the front step. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "we leave together." I nodded and rang the bell. My mother answered the door in a linen blouse, composed and deliberate. My father was standing by the living room window when we came in, arms crossed, already positioned. The air conditioning was on high, the kind of cold that feels less like comfort and more like a statement. My mother gestured to the sofa. We sat. "We have come up with a compromise," my mother said. Her voice was smooth and careful, the voice she used at her charity committee meetings. "You move the wedding to May of next year. We cover the change fees. Everyone has what they need." I looked at Daniel. He looked at me. "The change fees would be $12,000 to $15,000 minimum," I said. "We would lose our date. We would lose vendor relationships we have spent 18 months building. We would have to notify 200 people and ask them to rearrange their lives again." My father turned from the window. "We are offering to help," he said. "What more do you want?" It was not a question. It was the end of a sentence he had already finished in his head. Then the speakerphone on the coffee table crackled. Amber was calling in from Los Angeles, where she was staying with a friend. I could hear cafe noise in the background, the low hum of an espresso machine, the sound of someone living a very unbothered life. She had not flown home for this meeting. She had not considered it necessary. "I mean," she said, her voice slightly compressed through the speaker. "I already paid the deposit for Sedona, so. That small word, offered so casually, as though the rest of the sentence was obvious, as though my 18 months of planning was a variable that could be adjusted around her schedule. Something went very still inside me. "No," I said, "the date stays." My father's face changed. Not dramatically, not the way faces change in movies, just a tightening around the eyes, a slight elevation of his chin. The look of a man who is accustomed to being the last word in every room and has just heard something he does not intend to accept. The meeting ended 11 minutes later. My mother stood in the doorway as Daniel and I walked to the car, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes wet. My father did not come to the door. He had already turned back to the window. I did not sleep well that night. At 6:47 the following morning, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my father. I read it once, then twice, then a third time, the way you reread something when you are hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less than what they are. "Since you have chosen this path," it said, "do not expect our financial support. Your mother is devastated. I hope you are proud of yourself. The $120,000 your grandparents left, that was for a wedding that honored this family. This does not qualify. You will get nothing from us." I set the phone down on the mattress and lay there in the early morning light for a long time without moving. 47 days. They did not speak to me for 47 days. I counted them. Every single one. The first week was the hardest. I called my mother on Monday. Voicemail. Called again Thursday. Voicemail. Sent a text on Saturday that said simply, "Mom, can we talk? I miss you." I watched the 2 gray checkmarks turn blue at 2:17 in the afternoon. She had read it. The phone sat silent on the counter for the rest of the evening. It was still silent when I went to bed. I called my father 4 times over those first 2 weeks. Straight to voicemail each time, which meant he had declined the calls manually, one by one, each decline its own small deliberate act. I pictured him looking at my name on his screen and pressing ignore with the same flat certainty he had used in that Brentwood living room. The image made something in me go very quiet. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being ignored by people who know exactly what they are doing. It is different from being forgotten. Forgetting is careless. This was careful, precise, intentional in the way that only people who love you and have decided to weaponize that love can be intentional. Daniel watched me spiral and said nothing that wasn't useful. He made tea when I couldn't sleep. He sat with me on the back porch on the evenings I needed air and let the silence be what it was, without trying to fill it. He did not tell me it would be fine, because he is not a man who says things he cannot guarantee. What he did instead was stay, completely and without condition. Which, it turned out, was everything. Meanwhile, Amber posted 34 times. Sedona content mostly. Golden hour photographs on red rock formations, flat lay shots of her retreat schedule, and crystal-infused water bottles and journals with motivational phrases on the covers. A reel of her morning routine at the wellness center, set to a song I had heard too many times in too many similar videos. She looked luminous and unbothered, and entirely unaware that any of this had cost anyone anything. My parents liked every post. They commented on most of them. Beverly wrote, "So proud of you, sweetheart, you deserve every bit of this." Richard wrote, "That's our girl." They did not acknowledge my wedding countdown posts. Not once. On August 10th, I sent my mother a longer message. I told her I understood she was upset. I told her I still wanted her there. I told her I loved her, and that none of this had to be permanent. Read at 11:53 in the morning. No response. On August 24th, I tried again. 4 words. I would love you there. Delivered. Not read. I stopped trying after that. Not because I stopped wanting to reach them, but because I finally understood that the silence was not an accident. It was a lesson. And they were going to make sure I felt every minute of it. September came. The florist finalized the arrangements. The caterer confirmed the menu. Daniel's family drove up from Chattanooga for a weekend and took us to dinner and laughed too loud at the table and made everything feel, briefly, like it was going to be all right. I held on to that feeling for as long as I could. Then on September 8th, my phone rang. Beverly. My heart did something complicated. I answered before I could think better of it. Her voice was controlled. Not warm, not cold. The careful middle register of someone performing reasonableness. "Your father and I have discussed it," she said. "We will be at the wedding. We will be there because family shows up, even when they have been treated poorly. But I want you to understand something, Sarah. We will not pretend this is acceptable. You chose a date over your sister's future. Actions have consequences. We will not be participating in photographs. We will not be contributing financially. This is not cruelty. This is to teach you humility." I sat on the couch after she hung up and held the phone in both hands and looked at nothing in particular for a long time. Humility. My father's word, now hers, passed between them like a verdict they had reached together in a room I was not invited into. I wanted to say, "You are not teaching me humility. You are teaching me what it looks like when people use love as a lever." But I said nothing. I sat with it in the quiet apartment and felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Something that had finally stopped hoping. 8 days before the wedding, an email arrived from Carol Bennett at the Grand Magnolia Estate. Subject line: urgent, conflicting instructions. I opened it. 3 emails. All from my mother. Sent behind my back. Carol Bennett's message was professional and careful, the way venue coordinators are trained to be when they find themselves caught between 2 versions of the same family. She wrote that she had received some conflicting communication regarding the October 18th event and wanted to clarify directly with me before proceeding. She hoped I was doing well. She had attached 3 emails for my review. I sat at the kitchen table and read them in order. The first was dated September 1st. "Hello, this is Beverly Hargrove, mother of the bride. I need to discuss moving the October 18th event to sometime in 2026. There are family circumstances that make this date impossible. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I would appreciate your discretion." The second was dated September 15th. Jenna, I understand there are financial penalties involved, but this is a family matter of some sensitivity. The bride is making a decision she will regret, and we are trying to protect her from herself. Surely there is something you can do to help us explore our options. Please advise. The third was dated October 2nd, 16 days before my wedding. This event should not proceed on this date. I am asking you, as the mother of the bride, to please help us prevent what I believe is a serious mistake. I am available to speak at any time. Please call me immediately. I read all three twice. Then I forwarded them to Daniel without a word, and sat very still at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the surface, the way you press your palms down when you need to feel something solid beneath you. She had tried to cancel my wedding 3 times, behind my back, while telling me to my face that she would be there. Daniel called within 4 minutes of receiving the forward. His voice was low and controlled, the voice he used when something had made him genuinely angry, but he was not going to let the anger lead. "Come home," he said. "I need to show you something. I've been working on this for a while." He was already at the apartment when I arrived, laptop open on the kitchen table, a legal pad beside it with handwritten notes I couldn't read from the doorway. He pulled out the chair across from him and waited until I sat down. "I need you to trust me," he said. "I do," I told him. He turned the laptop toward me. What I was looking at was a bank statement, the trust account my grandparents had established in 2019. Daniel had spent 3 weeks quietly researching, using tools available to him through his work as a certified public accountant, cross-referencing public fiduciary records and account documentation he had requested through legitimate channels. He had not told me because he had not wanted to raise my hopes, or my anger, until he was certain. In January of 2025, he said, the trust had a balance of $120,000. Exactly what your grandparents left. I nodded. He clicked to the next page and pointed to a line highlighted in yellow. July 17th, 2025. A withdrawal. $80,000. Recipient. Amber R. Hargrove. Memo. Advance wedding distribution. The room went very quiet. I looked at the date. July 17th. 5 days before the family meeting in Brentwood. 5 days before my parents sat across from me in that living room and offered their compromise, and called me selfish when I refused. 5 days before any of that, they had already moved the money. The decision had been made before the conversation ever happened. The meeting was never a negotiation. It was a performance. Daniel pulled up the trust documents next. My grandfather's language was precise and unambiguous. Wedding fund of $120,000 to be distributed to first grandchild upon marriage. That is you, Daniel said quietly. Not Amber. You. He let that sit for a moment. Then he opened another document. A second transfer. September 10th, 2025. 2 days after Beverly called me to say they would attend the wedding but expected no smiles and no photographs. Amount: $14,500. Recipient: Amber R. Hargrove. Memo: Tulum extension package and excursions. After punishing you, Daniel said, after telling you there was no money, they spent another $14,000 on her vacation. I looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. Then at 11 p.m., Daniel closed the laptop halfway and looked at me across the table. There is one more thing, he said. There is one more thing, Daniel said. He opened the laptop fully again and turned it toward me. Another transfer. This one dated September 10th, 2025. 3 days after Beverly had called to say they would attend the wedding but expected no smiles and no photographs. The source account was my father's personal checking. The amount was $14,500. The memo read, Amber R. Hargrove, Tulum extension package and excursions. I looked at the screen. Then I laughed. It came out broken and strange, not the laugh of someone who finds something funny, but the laugh of someone whose body has run out of more appropriate responses. They paid for her vacation, I said, after telling me there was no money, after punishing me for weeks. They paid $14,000 to extend her trip. Daniel put his arm around me and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Tomorrow, everyone knows." We stayed up until almost 1 in the morning. Daniel walked me through all 22 slides he had built, one by one, on the laptop screen in the kitchen light. The opening photograph of my grandparents on their wedding day, 1956, black and white. My grandmother in a simple dress with flowers in her hair. The trust documents with the beneficiary language highlighted in yellow. The bank statements, the Instagram screenshots. Beverly's emails to Carol, the financial breakdown showing exactly what Daniel and I had paid ourselves, saved over 5 years. Every vendor, every deposit, every dollar accounted for. The title slide read, "The Price of Humility." "Last chance," Daniel said when we reached the end. "We can close this, get married tomorrow, and never show anyone any of it. Move forward. Let it go." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about my grandmother, about the careful language my grandfather had used in his will, about the word humility, and the way my parents had passed it back and forth between them like it belonged to them, like they had the right to define it for me. I reached into my bridal bag on the counter and took out the letter. I unfolded it slowly, the paper soft at the creases, and read it one more time in the kitchen light. "Sarah, my darling, when this day comes, know that I chose you. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real." I folded it carefully and placed it back in the bag. "We show them everything," I said. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "This isn't revenge," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. This is the truth. And the people in that room tomorrow deserve to know what the truth actually is." We turned off the lights just after 1. I lay in the dark and listened to Daniel breathing beside me, slow and even, the particular steadiness of a person who has made a decision and is at peace with it. I was not quite there yet, but I was close. I thought about the 2 chairs that would be placed at the front table tomorrow. I thought about Carol Bennett and her leather planner and her careful professionalism in the face of 3 emails designed to undo 18 months of work. I thought about Uncle Gary, who had said yes immediately when I called and asked if he would walk me down the aisle. "Your father is making a mistake, Melissa. I'd be honored." I thought about the string lights along the pavilion path and the old oak trees and the Tennessee hills going golden in the October afternoon. And then I stopped thinking and let the night be quiet. I woke up at 6:15 the next morning. My heart was already pounding before I opened my eyes. At 6:15, I was awake. By 8, I was in the bridal suite at the Grand Magnolia Estate, and Megan was already there with mimosas and a playlist she had spent 2 weeks curating, and the particular energy of someone who has decided that today is going to be perfect through sheer force of will. She zipped up my dress at 9:10, ivory, A-line, lace along the sleeves and collar. I had paid for it myself, every dollar, from savings I had built over 3 years of careful spending. My mother had offered to help, back in the early days when everything still felt possible. I had thanked her and declined, some instinct even then telling me to keep this one thing separate. I was glad now that I had. When Megan finished with the zipper, she stepped back and looked at me without speaking for a moment. Then she said, "Your mom is missing this. That's on her." I reached for the small velvet pouch on the vanity table and took out my grandmother's pearl necklace. A single strand, cream white, with a gold clasp that had been repaired once sometime in the 1980s. I fastened it around my neck and felt the weight of it settle against my collarbone. Cool and certain. like a hand on your shoulder from someone who is no longer in the room but has not entirely left it either. Grandma would be proud, I said to no one in particular. Megan hugged me from behind, careful not to disturb the dress. At 3:45, there was a knock at the door. Uncle Gary. He was 61 years old and had driven up from Murfreesboro that morning in a suit he had clearly had pressed the night before. His silver hair combed back neatly, his eyes a little red at the corners. He held out his arm without a word. I took it. "Your father is making a mistake," he said as we walked toward the pavilion. "I want you to know I've always known that. About a lot of things." I squeezed his arm and didn't answer. Through the trees I could see the guests already seated, white chairs arranged in neat rows along the pavilion path. The October light coming through the oak canopy in long, warm angles. 165 people. I did not look at the back row. I kept my eyes on the path ahead, on the string lights beginning to glow in the early evening shade, on the doorway at the end of the aisle where Daniel was waiting. When I stepped into the pavilion and our eyes met across the length of it, he mouthed 2 words. "You've got this." The ceremony began. Pastor James read from Corinthians. A friend of Daniel's performed a short acoustic piece on guitar. The flower girl, Daniel's 6-year-old niece in a yellow dress, scattered white petals with the absolute seriousness of someone performing a surgical procedure. The crowd laughed softly. For a few minutes, everything felt exactly as it was supposed to feel. Then, Pastor James reached the familiar words. "If anyone has reason to object to this union, speak now, or forever hold your peace." A beat of silence, then movement. Back row, far left. My father stood up. The gasps moved through the crowd like a wave, person to person, table to table. Pastor James blinked. Richard's voice came out clear and deliberate, loud enough to reach every corner of that pavilion. "Sarah, your mother and I are leaving. We want you to think carefully about what you have done to this family. We will not be part of this." Beverly rose beside him, one hand pressed to her mouth, shoulders shaking in the way of someone who wants very much to be seen crying. They walked down the center aisle together, her heels striking the stone path in a steady rhythm, his hand at the small of her back guiding her out. 50 people on the Hargrove side of the pavilion sat frozen. A few were crying. No one spoke. The silence lasted 45 seconds. It felt considerably longer. Then, from somewhere in the third row, a small voice. A little girl in a pink dress, no older than 6, holding a flower basket against her chest, looking up at her mother with wide and genuinely puzzled eyes. "Mommy," she said quietly, "why are the grandparents leaving? Did they forget something?" No one answered her. The question hung in the October air like something that could not be taken back. Uncle Gary leaned close to my ear. "Keep going, honey," he said. His voice was very steady. I looked at Pastor James. My voice came out steady too, which surprised me. "Continue, please," I said. Pastor James cleared his throat, nodded, and continued. Daniel held both my hands for the vows. When he reached the end of the words he had written, he paused. Then he improvised, quietly enough that only I could hear it fully, though the microphone caught most of it. "Sarah," he said, "your strength is the most honest thing I have ever witnessed. I promise you, in front of every person here, that I will always stand up for you. Always. No matter who is watching. I now pronounce you husband and wife." We kissed. The applause started somewhere in the middle rows and spread. Some people were crying, some were still in shock. As Daniel and I walked back down the aisle, I passed Aunt Diane in the 4th row. She was sitting very still with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes very bright. She mouthed 2 words at me. "I'm sorry." I smiled at her. Because in less than 4 hours, sorry was not going to be necessary. Something better than sorry was coming. Justice would. At 8:15, the toasts began. Ryan went first. He was Daniel's oldest friend and had approximately 7 years of embarrassing stories to choose from. He used 4 of them. The room laughed in the way rooms laugh when they need to, when laughter is the only reasonable response to the tension still sitting in the air from 3 hours earlier. It helped. Not completely, but enough. Megan went next. She talked about the first day I walked into Crestwood Elementary 6 years ago, nervous and 26 and carrying 4 bags more than any teacher needed. She talked about a Tuesday afternoon when I had called her from the school parking lot, crying because a student had finally, after 8 months of effort, read his first full sentence out loud. She said, "That is the kind of person Sarah is. She cries in parking lots over other people's victories. She deserves every good thing in this room tonight." Several people were already crying by the time Megan sat down. Then the DJ leaned into his microphone. And now, a special message from the groom. Daniel stood. He buttoned his jacket and picked up the microphone and looked at me across the table. I nodded once. He turned to face the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he said. "Especially those of you who stayed after what happened earlier this afternoon. I know that was not easy to witness." The room was very quiet. "I am not typically a man who speaks in front of crowds," Daniel continued, "but something happened today that I cannot stand here and pretend did not occur. And I do not think you would want me to." He pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The projection screen behind him lit up, white text on black. The price of humility. People leaned forward. Daniel's voice remained steady and quiet and carried perfectly through the microphone. "Sarah's parents told her she needed to learn humility," he said. "Her father used that word. Her mother repeated it. Tonight, I want to show you what humility actually costs, and who has been paying it." He clicked to the next slide. A photograph. Black and white. 1956. My grandparents on their wedding day. My grandmother in a simple dress with flowers in her hair. Daniel let the image sit before he spoke, and when he did, his voice carried the faintest tremor for the first time all evening. "These 2 people," he said carefully, "spent decades building something. Part of what they built was a trust. $120,000, set aside specifically for their first grandchild's wedding." He paused. "That is Sarah, not her sister. Sarah." The next slides showed the trust documents, the beneficiary language highlighted in yellow. Daniel read the key phrase aloud slowly, the way you read something you need people to actually hear. Then he said, "Here is what her parents did with it." Click. A bank statement filled the screen. July 17th, 2025. Transfer amount, $80,000. Recipient, Amber R. Hargrove. Memo, advance wedding distribution. The gasps came from every corner of the room at once. Someone near the screen said, "Oh my God," in a voice they did not intend to be audible. Daniel let it sit for 5 full seconds. $80,000, he said, given to Amber Hargrove, who is not engaged, 2 months before Sarah's wedding, while her parents told Sarah she would receive nothing. This transfer was made 5 days before Richard and Beverly Hargrove sat across from Sarah in Brentwood and called her selfish for not changing her wedding date. The next slides showed Beverly's 3 emails to Carol Bennett. Daniel read each one aloud in full, his voice never rising, never breaking. When he reached the third, dated October 2nd, 16 days before the wedding, the room had gone completely still. "This wedding should not proceed on this date," Daniel read. "I am asking you, as the mother of the bride, to please help us prevent what I believe is a serious mistake." He placed 3 manila folders on the table. "Copies of everything I have shown you tonight are in these folders," he said, "for anyone who needs them." He set down the microphone, walked back to our table, sat down beside me and took my hand without a word. The silence lasted 10 seconds, maybe 15. Then Aunt Diane stood up. She rose from her chair in the fourth row and began to clap, slowly at first. Then Uncle Gary stood beside her, and then Daniel's parents, and then the table behind them, and within 30 seconds every person remaining in that ballroom was on their feet. 165 people. Standing. Not for us exactly. For something that does not always get to stand in a room full of witnesses and be seen clearly. The truth. The ovation lasted 90 seconds. Then everything changed. Sunday morning, 6:47 a.m. My phone would not stop. Daniel and I were still in the bridal suite when the notifications began arriving in clusters. 3 of Daniel's cousins had posted about the speech the night before. By 9 a.m., those posts had been shared over 2,000 times. By noon, someone had tagged the local news. By Sunday evening, WSMV Channel 4 had left a voicemail requesting comment on an incident involving the Hargrove family and a wedding in Franklin, Tennessee. Monday morning, the Tennessean ran a brief item on page 3. By Tuesday, it had moved online and spread widely enough that the search results for Hargrove's BBQ Nashville had begun filling with one-star reviews. Owner stole from his own daughter to fund his other daughter's vacation. Family values, it turns out, are negotiable. The reviews kept coming through the week. 47 by Wednesday, more by Friday. Uncle Gary called Daniel on Thursday with the tone of someone delivering news they find both troubling and entirely deserved. The lunch rush at all 4 Hargrove locations had dropped noticeably. Richard was furious. Beverly was not answering her phone. On Tuesday, October 21st, a man named Mark Sullivan called my cell, 53 years old, 26 years practicing estate and trust litigation in Nashville. He had seen Daniel's presentation shared by a former client over the weekend. He had reviewed the situation. He wanted to represent me. Pro bono, he said, until settlement. We met him downtown the following morning. He reviewed everything for 90 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up. "You have an airtight case," he said. "Breach of fiduciary duty, wrongful distribution to a non-beneficiary." He wrote a number on his legal pad and turned it toward me. $193,000. The papers were filed in Williamson County Circuit Court on October 23rd. My parents were served on Friday the 24th. Their lawyer contacted Mark within a week. They wanted to mediate. November 5th. A neutral office building not far from the house where I had grown up. My parents and I were kept in separate rooms the entire 4 hours. I never saw their faces. The final offer was $193,000, full amount. One additional condition from my side, a written apology, signed by both, acknowledging what they had done. They agreed. The apology arrived by certified mail on November 8th. 1 page. We, Richard and Beverly Hargrove, acknowledge that we allowed favoritism and pride to guide our decisions regarding Sarah's wedding and the trust established by our parents. We violated the trust placed in us. We failed Sarah as parents. We are deeply sorry. I read it once, filed it in a drawer, never responded. The wire transfer arrived November 12th, $193,000. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened a real estate app and started looking at houses in Nolensville. We closed in April of 2026. A 3-bedroom on a quiet street with a backyard and a room at the end of the hall that caught the morning light beautifully. We painted the walls soft yellow. Daniel assembled the crib. I hung a small frame above it, a single line printed on cream paper in my grandmother's reproduced handwriting. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. A reminder, for whoever would sleep in that room someday, that being chosen has nothing to do with being flawless. That love, real love, does not come with conditions attached. I was 12 weeks pregnant when we moved in. We have not spoken to my parents since the mediation. Uncle Gary mentioned at Easter that Richard had asked about us. I thought about it and said, maybe someday. If he earns it, actions, not words. If you are listening to this and someone in your family is using money to control you, using words like humility and consequences to keep you small, I want you to know something. Document everything. Know what you are legally entitled to. Find the people who choose to stand beside you. And understand that the family you build with those people can be just as permanent, just as full of love, as anything you were born into. Sometimes more so. Some families are born, some are built. Ours, we built it. One honest moment at a time. And we are still building, in a yellow room in Nolensville, Tennessee, with my grandmother's words on the wall, and a whole life ahead that belongs entirely to us. That is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. There is something I keep coming back to in the quiet moments, in the yellow nursery, in the early mornings before the rest of the house wakes up. My grandparents did not leave that money because they were wealthy. They left it because they were paying attention. They saw something in me worth protecting, and they trusted the people around them to honor that. They trusted God to see it through, and God did. Not through ease or perfect circumstances, but through the truth. Through Daniel. Through 90 seconds of applause in a room full of witnesses that said, "We see you. We have always seen you." I think about the word humility often now. My father used it as a weapon, meant to make me smaller. But real humility is not about shrinking. It is about seeing yourself clearly, without the distortion of pride or other people's expectations. God asks for that kind of humility, not the kind that keeps you silent while someone takes what is yours. I am not angry anymore. Anger was necessary for a while, the way a fever burns through something that needs to go. But I am on the other side of it now, in a yellow room in Nolensville, with Daniel down the hall and a baby coming in the fall, and my grandmother's words above the crib. Not because you were perfect, but because you were real. God has been in every part of this story, especially the painful parts. If someone is using love as leverage over you right now, calling your boundaries selfishness and your self-respect pride, hear this. You are allowed to stand up. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to build a life that belongs entirely to you. Document everything. Find your Daniel. And remember that some of the most important families in your life will be the ones you choose, not the ones you were born into. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and tell me why. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And stay close, because there are more stories coming. Every single one of them is true.